Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Dear friends, welcome to the second module of the 7th week. We have seen that by the time we enter the 20th century, media has already taken up a shape and it also already possesses a certain appeal as well as a credibility among the people. It has become a cultural force. It has been internalized as a daily habit among the masses. It also acts as a lure and has started forming public opinion. Interconnections between media and culture also come to be academically debated around this time. Media and cultural theorists and scholars have long debated whether media shapes culture or is media is shaped by cultural practices and ideas. We can say that there exists a symbiotic relationship between media and culture. Culture shapes media because it transmits the cultural messages, ideas and symbols through mass media, and media also corresponds to the dominant modes of culture. It leads to the acceptance of these cultural messages and their subsequent dissemination and reinforcement among the people. We can also say that media content shapes culture because mass media particularly plays an instrumental role in constructing perceptions of social reality, interpersonal relationships, symbolic and representational meanings, as well as formulating strong public opinions over certain debates. Kellner has argued that mass media deeply influences people's perception of the world, social groups and even themselves. Mass media is said to create a common culture for the majority of people in most of the parts of the world today, which helps shape the prevalent view of the world and also helps to give a particular shape to the deepest values of the people. We find that in the beginning of the 20th century and towards the middle of it, various theories emerged to explain the influence of the media. They do not, however, necessarily explain the role of culture in processes of how meaning is made, but a brief review of these theories regarding how media takes shape and influences people will help us to understand their role in the formulation of culture. When we start talking about different media models, the first model which can be referred to is known as the magic bullet or the hypodermic needle. It became popular in 1920s and 1930s in the US society. The name is given because it affects the people directly in the same way a bullet affects a person or a hypodermic needle injects certain substance into the patient. So, because of its direct and severe impact on the people, this name is given. There is a very interesting story behind it. On one of the Halloween eves, around this time, the radio broadcast in various stations in the USA were stopped to announce a breaking news that Martians are invading Earth. Even though it was a part of the radio version of H.G. Wells' famous novel War of the Worlds, this sudden announcement in the form of a breaking news generated mass hysteria and confusion among the people. People came out on the streets, people started purchasing the daily consumerist items in a panic. But it supported this idea that mass media may have a direct and immediate effect on the audience akin to the effects of an injection. Though later on we find that this particular media model was largely discredited because it gives too much of an influence to this idea that audience is basically passive, and therefore it assumes that messages are interpreted according to the intention of the sender, which has been proved to be not accurate. Soon this idea of hypodermic needle or magic bullet was replaced by various mid-century models which tried to incorporate social responsibility in the media management. They talked about allowing certain freedom to media, but they also tried to include a feedback mechanism so that the receivers can also pass on certain ideas to those people who are responsible for transmitting this message using different type of media. A discordant voice is heard in the form of George Gardner with his phrase of mean world syndrome. This particular media theory became popular in late 1960s. This theory was propounded in the context of TV programs. However, we can say that even in today's media, in the beginning of the 21st century, this particular model is still correct. His project on cultural indicators research documented how trends in television content affect the perceptions of the viewers about the world they are living in. Gardner suggested that people who watch more television are more likely to perceive the world as a dangerous and therefore a threatening and a frightening place. And since too much viewership of television channels generates a sense of subtle fear in the psyche of the people, these people can be easily manipulated and controlled, because a fearful person is obviously more susceptible to deceptively simple, strong yet tough measures and hardline postures. And therefore, we find that Gardner has linked too much viewership of TV program with the gullibility of the audience, which can be manipulated. In comparison to Gardner, we find that other mid-century models were still talking about the social responsibility of media. Another theory which we can refer to is a two-step flow, which says that media works not directly, but through the influence of the opinion leaders. It tried to differentiate between the elite and the mass media, and particularly took the example of those types of media which talk about the advances in sciences. It was suggested that not everybody can understand scientific communication, so certain people would understand it and disseminate the ideas further, and therefore, it is necessary to distinguish between the elite and the mass media. So, it put a lot of emphasis on the role of those people who can be perceived as opinion leaders, people who are already holding a leadership position in the structure of the world and its organizations. This idea is considered to be pertinent in today's media, which we would discuss further in one of the later modules. Another model of media which we can refer to is known as the agenda setting model. It suggests that mass media can exert a lot of influence on the people through repeatedly covering a particular message or by underscoring a particular tone in a message. So, the repeated coverage of a particular message or a particular tone formulates public opinion about various issues related with politics, economy and cultural issues. It is also a very relevant argument, and we will also come back in detail to this idea in one of the later modules. The third model is known as uses and gratifications model. It emphasizes connectivity and reciprocity in communication and its consumption. It assumes that audience is active and largely autonomous, and looks at why do people use media and what do they use it for, instead of focusing only on treating audience as passive recipients. It is a positivistic model in comparison to the other two, and all these models are relevant in the context of the 21st century electronic media. So, all these models we would be revisiting again. Another model which we can refer to is Hodgkinson's model, which also talks about the reciprocal relationship between media and culture. We can find that the technological developments and the subsequent and consequent media developments in the 21st century have changed the way in which the modeling is done in the field of mass communication. So, Hodgkinson's model also talks about the role of social and cultural determiners and environment as a component that links audience responses to media messages. This figure, which is being shown on the right hand side top of this screen, is Wiest's media model of culture. In this media model, we find that the role of mass media is explained from the perspective of the diffusion of culture. It suggests that mass media is loaded with cultural messages, and these cultural messages are used by audiences in turn to understand as well as to express certain meanings. According to him, culture is a shared system, but audiences consume different kinds of messages and different quantities of those messages, and the kinds and quantities they use and they consume is incorporated in different ways of their lives. The tower in this figure in the model represents how cultural messages are broadcast via mass media text, and the fluctuating thickness of the arrows refers to different quantities of messages that individual tunes in. This model assumes that culture is transmitted through various socialization institutions and processes, and media is influential because it can easily reach people and can spread various messages quickly and simultaneously to an enormous number of audience. The broadcast analogy represents the omnipresent and intangible nature of culture and media, particularly in the context of the 21st century. It also assumes, which is also a very much contemporary worldview, that culture is fragmented. It explains differences and inconsistencies in values and beliefs. So, this model also takes up a postmodernist approach towards the modeling in the area of mass communication. The dark gray circle in this figure is symbolic of the filter, that is the cultural competency and capacity of individuals to understand and respond to the messages. The outer circle in this model represents the lines of actions based on these filters, the cultural messages which supply information about those values and beliefs and practices which are culturally valuable and therefore, they are acceptable. So, we would find that in a way this model also suggests what type of a normative behavior is understood and appreciated by the audience. These two models have been developed in the 21st century, and therefore, they cater to the demands and needs of the contemporary media. In the earlier models, we have seen that the recent changes in the media landscape have not been incorporated. The latest World Wide Web tools, which have emphasized usability and availability of user, have generated different types of contents like YouTube, Wikipedia, Twitter and so on. And therefore, we find that the cost of the technology is continually diminishing. People are able to use it more and more with better ease, and therefore, the social media has become immensely popular. All these changes have been brought about by internet, and its widespread reach has made it possible for people to create their own content and send it immediately to a massive audience. This new media landscape ensures that the traditional forms of mass media no longer have absolute power as the gatekeepers of cultural messages. So, we find that the way media is enacted and is shaped also is shaping our cultural consciousness and our participation in different cultural modes. It is with this background that we begin our discussion of culture. How do we understand the idea of culture through the prism of media as we have discussed it till this point? We find that around 1960s and 70s, the word culture acquired a new meaning. Priorly, it was associated with literature, art, classical music, etc. And to have culture meant to possess a certain type of a taste for particular kinds of artistic endeavor. Anthropologists started to use this term in a broader sense. They used it to denote forms of life and of social expressions which included so many things, including the way people behave while eating, talking with each other, cooking, choosing and becoming their sexual partners, interactions at the workplace, the way the educational systems function in a particular system. How do we engage in ritual social behavior in family gatherings, how do we celebrate our festivals, and also the regularities of these procedures and rituals of human life in communities came to be understood as culture. In the beginning of the 20th century, we find that it was this idea of culture which was popularized particularly by the Marxist thought, which viewed culture basically as being a political entity. It viewed culture as a means of domination, assuring the rule of one class or group over other. For example, the thought of patriarchy, the thought of a particular race being superior to others, the idea that certain nations are to be colonized by certain races. At the same time, we find that the idea of culture as a form of resistance to these forms of domination also became an accepted interpretation of the word culture. As a means of resistance, it came to be accepted as a way of articulating a point of view which was in opposition to the dominant arguments of a particular culture. I would particularly refer to the work of Theodor Adorno and Horkheimer, who have written in their essay Dialectic of Enlightenment that the mass culture, that is the culture of TV, radio, films, cheap paperbacks, etc., works as a tool of domination. According to these writers, culture and these type of mass media are a way for capitalism to offer ephemeral gratification to people who are condemned to lives of work. And by work, they do not only mean physical work, but anything which is repetitive in nature and not linked directly with either explicit goals or tangible objectives. According to Adorno and Horkheimer, these type of cultural products are a way to hide the ugliness of the capitalist exploitation. British philosophers like Raymond Williams, Richard Hogarth and E.P. Thompson viewed culture as a means of resistance to capitalism. According to them, if illiteracy was a way of keeping poor working class people away from the intellectual instruments so that they are not attracted towards any idea of rebellion, then literacy itself can also be used as a form of resistance. In the form of pamphlets, which may be clandestine, the underground newspapers, etc., we can think of a way of maintaining and nurturing alternative perspectives to those which are demanded by the capitalist forces for the progress of industrial capitalism and also for continuing the submission of the large tracts of population to factory labor. So, we find that in almost all the countries in the beginning of the 20th century, media and culture became interdependent ways of understanding resistance. In the Red Revolutions of Russia and China, books and pamphlets were used to create a particular type of mindset among the people. They helped the cause of resistance. In Indian resistance also to the British colonial forces, we find that the media of print had a major role to play. On the east coast of the USA, we find that the newspaper Gadar was started, and it was followed by the publication of a magazine with the name of Chand in India. The newspaper Gadar as well as this magazine Chand was circulated in a clandestine fashion so that people could understand the atrocities being perpetuated by the colonial empire. So, we find that there is a shifting worldview of the people. In these changing definitions and perspectives, we find that there are certain interconnected forces, and they are the thread of technology as well as the impact of technology on media, and at the same time market forces which can also be perceived. So, we can say that the impact of printing press, electricity, chain line production on literature, media, entertainment, social life, and as well as different forms of public entertainment changed our perspective on various contemporary issues including gender, ethnicity, race, colonialism, etc. And these interlinks cannot be ignored as they collectively shape our culture and the way we interpret our culture. So, we can say that the linkages between media and culture are inextricably established. They are independent as well as interdependent, shaping each other and also being shaped by the other. We would continue this discussion about how the notions of culture have developed further within the framework of different critical theories. Thank you.